Hi, I'm Scott Youngman. I'm the Enlist Field Specialist for Iowa. And in this two-part video series, we're going to cover Enlist best practices. We're going to talk about planning for that application, and then we're going to talk about making that application. So in part one, in planning, I like to start out with the fact that soybeans naturally, this is soybeans without any trait, they're 23 times more tolerant to 2,4-D than they are dicamba. And I know there's a lot of dicamba users coming over to the E3 Enlist system, and congratulations for that. But I think you're going to really love the fact that soybeans are not a susceptible crop downwind. You can spray Enlist as long as your wind speed is less than 15 miles an hour on label, and soybeans can be immediately downwind, as corn and alfalfa can be as well. This is why you hear growers and retailers talking about Enlist being the neighbor-friendly program. And there's a lot of facts to support that. Next, I want to talk about another key differentiation between dicamba and Enlist. We do not need DRAs or VRAs with Enlist. We have Colex-D in the jug that performs the same function as a DRA. We definitely do not need a DRA, and we most certainly do not need a volatility reducing agent that's required with dicamba. Great news, right? Another thing that I think is fantastic, we love AMS. AMS conditions the water and it makes our herbicides perform better, particularly Liberty. You get that AMS in there up to 3 pounds, go to enlisttankmix.com. We've got a lot of approved AMS liquids and dries that you can use. Of course, you can tank mix with up to 1,300 insecticides and fungicides. You'll see that on enlisttankmix.com too. Pretty powerful. Finally, I want you to know that we recommend crop oil and MSO. You know, we get some variable weather conditions across the Midwest. Crop oil and MSO aid us in the penetration and uptake of Enlist. And that'll be illustrated in this slide right here. This is Enlist alone in the upper left photo. That droplet's not very, very wide. This is the leaf surface of a weed. You can see the waxy surface. Look below at the second photo below it when we add crop oil. Look how the microscope has to zoom out to get the whole droplet. Much bigger droplet, and look how it's altering that waxy surface. That's why you're getting more Enlist uptake. One step better, MSO. Look at that cratering effect on that waxy surface on the right. That's why MSO is even better than COC. They're both great products. I will add, though, that cratering is probably that little bit of speckling, bronzing that you see after using COC or MSO. Well, please don't worry about that. That's purely cosmetic. You're not going to be seeing that down the road. You know, for a lot of reasons, growers, retailers are saying, I've got freedom to spray again with Enlist herbicides. It really is true. You know, and since we've got this increased freedom, we've got this increased flexibility out there with our spray program versus particularly dicamba system, I want you to spend some time and look at our product use guide at enlist.com, and you're going to see our nozzles. We can start focusing now on nozzles that do what they're supposed to, and that's give us coverage. And if you go to this chart, you'll see green and yellow. We want you picking the greens. The greens are better than the yellows. The yellows are nozzles that, yes, they're good for drift control, but they're not going to give us as good a coverage. For example, the TTI is an approved nozzle, but it's yellow on that chart, and you see why here in this right here, comparing a TTI nozzle to an AIXR, an air ducted extended range nozzle from TJet. It does a wonderful job of covering that weed surface on this, illustrated by this water sensitive paper. You know, the final thing, cool thing about this, look what 20 gallons does versus 10. 20 gallons clearly gives us better coverage. And that's going to lead into my next slide, where I'm going to suggest to you that even with glyphosate, we should start thinking about 20 gallons per acre. If you look at our application guide available on enlist.com, you'll see that we recommend 20 gallons for glufosinate, and that's coming pretty standard practice. But I'd ask you to consider 20 gallons an acre even for glyphosate. Finally, I want to take your attention to spray pressure. I don't want 30 psi at the boom. Remember, we're taking our sprayers back. Let's get that pressure up. That'll give us better coverage, smaller droplets. So instead of 30 psi, let's look for 50 to 70, something at the upper range of what that nozzle can spray. And again, you'll find that in that chart that I referenced in our product use guide. So what impacts your weed control efficacy? In part 2, we're going to talk about species and height. We've already talked about nozzles and pressures and volume, giving us better coverage. We talked about how we like crop oil and MSO. Just briefly, the environmental factors I want you to think about. We want weeds that are smaller and actively growing. We don't want situations where you're trying to spray bigger weeds on hot, dry days. Best case scenario is we're spraying 2 to 4 inch water hemp with humidity well above 50%. We get that by spraying earlier in the season, not later. So think about that. We really want you spraying smaller weeds with weather conditions that are more conducive for herbicides working, and that comes primarily earlier in the year, certainly with days where we've got better relative humidity and we're not in a dry weather pattern that we can get with later. Final point I want to talk about are susceptible crops. It's important to remember, Enlist is a very powerful broadleaf herbicide, and common sense would tell you that you probably just can't go spraying with a garden downwind. And that's a do not spray situation, especially if there's vine crops, tomatoes, fruiting vegetables out there. Certainly not if there's a vineyard downwind. And I'll also add nurseries to that. Those are high value. You don't want to be spraying those situations with those crops downwind. And also use some common sense if there's some budding trees that are budding out around the field. If they're downwind, you're probably going to be okay with our 30-foot buffer. But if you're particularly concerned, treat it as a do not spray situation. Thank you for watching part 1 of our Enlist Best Practices.